otros dos. No, escuchás el idioma que habla la persona que es el speaker. Si no te
Exactly.
puedes
Perfecto,
cambiar.
Okay,
perfecto.
I'm allowing everybody in, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi,
Ana-
Julia.
Annabelle, the floor
Hi,
is
everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Good
Hello.
afternoon.
Nice to meet you.
Hello, it's really nice to meet you, Annabelle. Annabelle? Is
Annabelle.
that correct? Annabelle. A
That's okay though.
Brazilian way. A Brazilian way of saying Annabelle. Annabelle.
Okay, so I think everyone has joined our meeting today. So I just wanted to say hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Open Data Charter Implementation Working Group session. So thank you for joining us today and for what I think will be a very interesting and timely discussion on interoperability in digital public infrastructure, also known as DPI. So my name is Annabelle Austin, and I'm a member of the Open Data Charter Implementation Working Group's Steering Committee. And today's discussion will explore interoperability not only from a technical perspective, but also from governance, rights-based, implementation. And we have three fantastic speakers joining us from across the international digital governance and DPI community. So the format for today will be a short presentation from each speaker, followed by an open discussion and Q&A at the end. And with that, I'll introduce our first speaker. And I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, but Juan is our first speaker. He is from Investments Principles for Latin America and the Caribbean for Co-Development. He will be speaking about the governance side of interoperability and how the digital public infrastructure system can work for everyone through multi-stakeholder governance structures. He'll also be drawing examples, including the ID broker currently developed under Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as governance approaches related to Brazil's PIX payment system. So please join me in welcoming Juan.
Muchas
Sorry,
gracias.
Annabelle, just to ask to the public that we will be recording the session, so just to let them know. Sorry,
Right.
Go ahead.
Apologies. And yes, the session will be recorded.
Thank you very much. Annabella, I just asked for permission to share my screen. If you could please, thank you. Now it
Yes.
should be loading. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
perfect.
Yes, all good on my end.
Listo, bueno, voy a cambiar a español, aprovechando
Okay,
que
I'm
tenemos.
switching to Spanish since we have simultaneous interpretation. I believe myself to be far more eloquent in Spanish than English, so I will make the most out of my time. So I'm gonna be speaking Spanish, but then in the Q&A, I can take questions in English or Spanish, whatever suits you best. Let me start by saying that I am extremely thankful for the invite to the session. I think it's great to be here to discuss this topic, which is increasingly relevant. It's going to be a little bit weird to have my presentation as the first because I'm going to be addressing some interoperability aspects that have to do with governance rather than technical aspects. But then we're going to be hearing from Julia and Arturo, and we are going to have a great opportunity to cover the whole spectrum of issues. Let me start with a couple of very short definitions of how we understand DPI so that we can kick off this conversation. And after that, I'm sorry, my slides are in English. I hope that's not a problem to anyone. But if you need them translated, you can ask me and I can translate these slides for you as well. So as I was saying, I'm gonna talk about the understanding we have at Co-Develop, where I work, how we understand digital public infrastructure, and what is our understanding of governance and the role of governance in terms of operability. So we're going to go one concept at a time. And in addition to that, I'm going to be starting my talk with DPI because I think it's extremely clear when you look at it from the definition, it's very clear to see the role of interoperability as part of this concept. We in Co-Develop understand DPI as an approach to digitization rather than a technical concept or a specific understanding of one system. It's an approach to digitization that relies on building blocks, that is, different pillars in every system within the state, creating a common base of digitization that will allow to scale those systems and services that are provided by the state to the whole population, but that does not imply that there is one specific system that we can call DPI. And there are two salient characteristics. One of them is that DPI is publicly accountable. That is, we can ask it to render accounts publicly, and it is designed with embedded safeguards and a civil society engagement at its core, covering a wide range of stakeholders, without which it would be impossible to think that the public infrastructure is truly public. And the second one, probably the most relevant to our discussion today, is the fact that it is foundational and interoperable. That means that it can be used for different systems at once. So if you have an identity verification system that we would call a DPI system, that identity system may be used to provide private services such as opening bank accounts, or for public services such as getting a driver's license. So both those systems that are different and are rendered by different entities could rely on our DPI on the same identity verification system. That is why it's so essential. And that is why interoperability is so important, because it allows for this interoperation. And now I'm going to address that in a little bit more detail, but it allows for this cross operation for different uses among different users, different providers, and if there weren't interoperable, it wouldn't actually be DPI. And just to wrap it up, you may have heard of it, you may already be aware of it if you have been following up on certain discussions on DPI, generally speaking. If anyone does not know this, I just wanted to share that there are three essential pillars that are part of every digital public infrastructure. One of them is identity, which I mentioned earlier, data sharing, data interoperability, especially within the state, but also between the state and other entities, and finally, instant payment methods such as PECs that I'm sure Julian will share more on. So that is just to give you a bird's view of how we are addressing digital public infrastructure from the point of view of interoperability. Before addressing the technical aspect, there is something that I will always like to highlight about DPI, which is the P in the middle, which stands for public. DPI needs to be public. The most obvious thing is that it's public in as much as it belongs to the government, because DPI systems are systems that are under strict control by the government, and that is a way of understanding that. But I would say that it's a little bit narrow. So how do we broaden it? How do we find a concept that is not so limited? By approaching it from the point of view of public nature, which is the public purpose, and technical attributes that make this DPI technical. And this is all taken from an article which is Digital Public Infrastructure and Public Value, What is Public About the DPI. These are our authors, Mariana Mazzucato, David Eves, and Beatriz Vasconcelos. If you ask me, this article is a very good starting point to start reading about DPI, because it provides a very clear basis to better understand why this infrastructure is public. But as I was saying, the purpose may be public, it may be purpose of the public interest, or technical attributes that are inherent in this digital public infrastructure. What does it mean that they would have a public purpose? Well, they would guarantee the performance of certain essential functions of the state. They should create social value, enhance the living conditions of people in a certain country. They may produce economic value and guarantee a better quality of life. This is one of the purposes of these systems. What does it mean for them to have technical attributes? Well, the first of them, and that is why I decided to include it here, is interoperability, because interoperability is essential to the public nature of GPI, because it allows many different instances to use the same infrastructure. Let's think, for instance, of an identity system that is only used by one specific bank. That wouldn't be public because it's related only to the purpose of that bank, but it does not allow for any interoperation with other public or private services, so it couldn't be considered public. They also reusable, and the fact that it's open are also relevant in determining whether it's digital public infrastructure or not. So that gives us an idea of the role of interoperability in GPI systems. However, I've talked a lot about interoperability, but I have not said what we mean by interoperability. So I'm gonna try to explain it in the simplest possible way, but I think it's a very good way to approach it. There should be at least 3 pillars to that interoperability. The first one, probably the most obvious, is technical interoperability. File format should allow us to move them from one computer to another. Everyone should be using the same operating system, or as the operating system should allow for their use anywhere else. It's not as having Google Play Store and Apple App Store that do not allow us to have the same applications, and we need to develop 2 different applications. So these are technical features of interoperability. I believe it's pretty obvious, but my technical background is not so strong, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. The second pillar is a standard and regulation-based interoperability. What does it mean? Well, this may be technical or non-technical, that depends, but we need standards that will allow us to have that interaction between different data sets, because that is what actually guarantees interoperability, and also regulation that refers to, redundant as it may sound, the regulatory framework of a country that allows everyone collecting data to share those data with other government entities. So this is yet another way to understand regulatory interoperability. And finally, probably the one that I'm going to be talking about the most today is human and institutional operability. And that means that data are in the hands of people, and it is people that are going to interact with that information and going to make decisions on how to move data from one place to the other. That often implies bargaining, negotiating between different organizations, private and public entities, and that conversation to make sure that interoperability happens is what I'm including in this human or institutional component of interoperability, and it's the one that is most closely related to governance. So, all of that introduction was only to better understand some concrete mechanisms that are basically multi-stakeholder mechanisms of governance for GPI. And I have a couple of examples, but I'm going to go over them very quickly because I know that I'm running out of time, and Julian is going to be talking about PECs. But the 2 examples I brought are PECs, which is just an instance where we can find different private banks, the Central Bank of Brazil, that is kind of the organizer, and some CSOs such as IRLAC, which is the only one that is part of the PEX forum so far, and there they make decisions on GPI governance, and they determine how it's going to become interoperable. That is why it's so important. The second one that I wanted to mention, and probably no one else is going to be talking about that today, but I'm gonna respond more questions, are the ID lag mechanism and the GIALC network. The GIALC network is a network of different ministries of technology and communications of Latin America and the Caribbean, and IDLAG is sort of a broker. It's a space that allows different identity systems from across the region in order to verify their credentials across borders. That mechanism is a pretty interesting mechanism because it does not require the creation of new credentials, and these credentials are just interoperable. So, for instance, in Uruguay, you can ask things about people crossing borders or verifying yellow fever vaccination, and it's very robust. So this is just taking its very first steps, and this is just an invitation for you to follow on the process. But I believe that to be a very clear example of how there is interoperability that needs a governance structure. And the last slide, which is something that is very much on the table right now because it has to do with interoperability risks. So I brought a meme to make it a bit funnier, which is Michel Foucault talking about surveillance. And I just brought it because one of the greater risks of interoperability is over surveillance, excessive surveillance, violation of people's privacy. Basically, for those people whose personal data are stored in those systems that are interoperated, and there are two different responses. One of them is governance that I've already talked about, and there's also some design-based privacy principles, something that we also know about. Sorry, I heard the mic. I don't know if anyone had a question or something. No, okay. So, as I said, design-based that have to do with data minimization, data centralization, and data encryption, of course, but some more technical principles such as interoperability, possibility of linking or unlinkability, zero knowledge proofs, deniability, the possibility of denying verification of our credentials, and asymmetric privacy. I went over them very, very quickly, but if anyone would like more information about every one of them, there's a really interesting course that is called Privacy in Digital Public Infrastructures that was developed by Epicenter Works, an Austrian CSO, and every one of them is broadly developed in that course. I think it's extremely useful when you are doing advocacy in process of deployment of DPI and for civil society or for the states. I hope I have not exceeded my time, and I hope all other speakers will have enough time to make their presentations. And of course, I'm here for you to answer any questions when we get to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And that's all from me.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and no worries about the time. We are very much good on that front. I just also wanted to give you another thanks for explaining interoperability as well as explaining the P in DPI and relating it to the public. Being in open data, we really want much of that data to be in the public, and it's very important for us. So I really want to thank you for highlighting that point. So I'll go over to our next speaker, who is Arturo. So our second speaker is a lead specialist in Inter-American Development Bank. Arturo will be discussing interoperability in digital public infrastructure, particularly the idea that data exchange, DPI, is often mistaken and treated as synonymous with interoperability, when in reality, interoperability can encompass many different methods of data exchange. So we are very pleased to have him join us today. Welcome, Arturo.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. I have also some slides, and I'll start my timer for 15 minutes. Okay, so thank you again for the invitation to the implementation working group session of the Open Data Charter. And thank you, Juan, because I'm gonna go very fast through some of my slides after your presentation. My idea, as Annabelle briefly mentioned, was an intro to digital public infrastructure, which I'll go pretty fast on interoperability, maybe touching a little bit without going too technical on how we see interoperability, and it will have some technical aspects. And then the center of my discussion is that when we start hearing about the interoperability of the data exchange sort of foundational DPI, everybody starts looking at interoperability, and that's not the only one. And I would argue that by far not the only one, nor the easiest. So there are other ways through which we can sort of approach the data exchange digital public infrastructure, and we'll discuss about that. And then very briefly about some enablers and closing arguments in 15 minutes. So before that, on every talk, and Mercedes and Nati have seen this before, I start with 30 seconds just saying, especially this crowd that works on open data, the value of data is in its use. Anything below, using the data is not, doesn't realize the value of data. It's just cost or investment, depending on whether you're going to be using it or not. So there's a pyramid on value that starts with observations and that ends up with decision making, with actually translating that data into new policies, new products, new services, improvements, etc. If you don't do that, if you just do nice reports and you shelve them, it's not, you're not realizing the value of data. The value of data is realized when decision, products, services, policies are made or improved based on it. And so working on open data, even though we sometimes feel so satisfied when we open data and we publish it because of how hard it is and how costly it is and how much sweat goes into it, it's just starting, because the value of data is in its use and not just, the publication of data is the beginning of the open data, I think, value realization. Okay, with that, DPI. This is the definition. It's long-winded from the G20. I think this was under Brazil's leadership. So probably Julia knows it best. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to share the slides if you want, and you can go through it, but it's available on the outcome document of the G20 Digital Economy Working Group. It's actually, verbatim one of the paragraphs. Things that I think are worth highlighting. It's a shared digital system. And again, Juan elaborated on all of this. So used by multiple stakeholders. It's interoperable, which means basically that the systems within this digital public infrastructure work with each other and interoperate. It's open standard. So we try to avoid, and try is a keyword here, vendor locking. And it's at societal scale. So it reaches the whole population. These are things that are not minor when you start thinking about them. Juan also spoke about the three sort of main foundational DPIs. There are others, digital signature has been thrown in as a DPI, PKI, workflow managers, etc. But these are the three foundationals: digital identification, data exchanges, which is the one we're going to be focusing on, and digital payments, which Julia will probably speak about. This analogy, I don't know where I heard it. I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere, so I'm not going to take credit on that. But just like roads don't serve one trip but enable all trips, DPIs don't serve one service, they should enable all services. And this is very important because together with this, Juan made the emphasis on the P, on public. I'm going to just say on the I of infrastructure that it's an analogy. So many times when we say DPI, people are starting to look on the infrastructure, on the servers, and on the, all the big purchases and the $1 million equipment. There may be some, but mostly it's platforms, it's systems, it's software that are enabled by all that infrastructure. So the infrastructure is not the objective, it's not the thing. The analogy is the I, what the I is for, and it mimics what, roads, networks have done to the physical sort of economy. These DPIs are doing to the digital one. So with that, data exchanges, and then, like I said, many conversations we have data exchanges, they immediately go into interoperability. I would actually argue that immediately go into X-Road, which is the open source interoperability platform from Estonia, which is good, and I don't want to criticize that or seen as criticizing it, but there are others also, okay? So, and then interoperability is not the only thing. However, since the topic of this session is interoperability and DPI, I'm gonna take just 2 minutes on explaining what is interoperability. And usually we use sectors like education and health. I wanted to use the justice sector as an example. So if you think about this sort of timeline or process between a report of a crime and sending the thief or the criminal to jail, you have the report, the arrest, an investigation, charges are pressed, trial, and then jail. And this is done by different entities throughout the justice administration system. You have the police, you have the prosecutor's office, you have the judiciary, you have the Ministry of Justice, and then of course they all have different systems through which they process all the information and they connect to each other. And this may seem funny, but it's what we've seen in many places. The typewriter is there. The guy with the bicycle taking the file from one place to the other is there. The paper airplane is not there, but basically you're taking stocks of paper and loading those stocks of paper, and that's what you have right now. Now, when we throw the term interoperability, we think, bullet train kind of thing that is goes to one place to the other at light speed and connects everything. And that is, in theory, what you want to have. But in reality, what you have is that every entity starts buying their own thing. They start digitizing their own thing. They don't care whether one talks to the other. They just look fancy. They look nice. This is what I think I need, and I go for it. Interoperability is really about having an agreement on the basics on which all these things that can or cannot be purchased separately or together, but need to run on the same tracks. So we need to define the distance between the rails. We need to define how the train is going to communicate. We need to define a lot of things so that once we start buying our pieces, they can talk to each other. And that's a little bit, again, not very technical, but this is what interoperability is. Juan alluded to this. There are usually we talk about 4 layers in interoperability. The organizational one in terms of who does what, who has what role, who owns what piece of information and who shares it with whom and who has access to see it. You have the semantic layer, which is basically shared meaning. I usually use the example of names. If for me, name means first name space, second name space, first last name space, second last name, that's a thing. If in the US, where they don't use second last name, name is first name dash space, initial for the second name, and then last name. Then when we exchange the field name, we're going to be seeing different things. So we need to agree on what we mean by these different things, common identifiers, frequency of updating, etc. That's a semantic layer. The technical layer, and Juan alluded to this, protocols, APIs, data formats, message standards, and the legal and regulatory. Again, I'm not repeating what he said. The one thing I will say, though, is that these two are where we see the most problems when you are trying to implement interoperability. The technology is there. The tracks, there are so many types of tracks out there. There aren't that many. So the problem is when people need to communicate, when people need to coordinate, when people need to agree on these different semantics, on these different dictionaries, on the organizational role. And this is something that is underlying these 4 dimensions, and Juan mentioned it, which is a human element. People need to coordinate, and the one thing that we need to internalize is that when we sit down on a table to coordinate, we will probably be experiencing short-term costs in lieu of long-term benefits. And that's something that not many people and not many institutions are willing to do. So in our experience, these are the hardest. Now, the thing is, interoperability is just one of many types of data exchanges. And when we think about the digital public infrastructure and the exchange of data, there are many other means through which we can start exchanging information. This is an example that I got from a publication that we made with the GovLab from NYU, but interoperability is probably on that top left corner, government to government, but you have 8 other types of data exchange mechanisms or data exchange flows that could also participate or become or be seen as data exchanges. And just as an example, comparing open data to interoperability, they complement each other. We see them as data exchange methods. There are just different, access, different public objectives, different triggers, different legal bases, etc. But they are different ways through which you exchange data, right? So if anything, on this presentation, what I want to emphasize is interoperability does not equal to data exchange. It is one of many. The other one that I don't have a slide, but it's becoming pretty pervasive is verifiable credentials, which is another way to exchange data, and that we're seeing a lot of rollout. And maybe Juan can talk to that because the Center for DPI has been and co-develop have been working on this. Again, different types of collaborations. This is also the same publication I mentioned with the GovLab. How to make it happen. And again, talking about implementation, one of the things that we've seen that works is to have, at least internally within entities, a reference framework for data management. This is just an example from Chile that we supported and we see as something that really does the work, which is getting DAMA, and I'm sorry, the content in the slide in Spanish, but I grabbed it from a presentation in Chile. But basically, they pick up the wheel of DAMA. For those who don't know, it's a reference framework for data management, and they have added 3 dimensions that they think are more relevant for the public sector. We agree. And by that, they are covering, I think, all the different dimensions around data that may enable not only the data exchange at the interoperability level, but as you can see, has open data as a dimension, and also talks about security and privacy, etc. They have a maturity index that has been applied across the board on the public sector in Chile. So every public institution in Chile now knows about the different dimensions at their maturity level. This is an example. None of that. How is the region doing in general on DPIs and on infrastructure? Well, we still have countries that don't have a digital ID. Now, those that have a digital ID is not society-wide. In many cases, it's just working as a single sign-on for government, but we think it's just a step towards having this sort of more broad national private and public sector digital ID. 14 don't have a national data strategy. 9 don't have interoperability platforms, and those that do, in many cases, they're not fully exploring or exploiting its potential. There's a lack of regulatory mandatory usage of the interoperability platform, and that has its own complications, and I'm more happy to elaborate on those during the question and answers. So where to start? Between entities, like the example on the justice system, you need to define those roles and responsibilities, that governance around the data life cycle. You need to define quality standards, because once you start exchanging data, quality becomes one of the main variables that determines the success of that exchange. If I'm exchanging data that is not updated, that it's wrong, that it's incomplete, etc., then that exchange is not going to continue for too long. And something that is now applied a lot to AI, but that works for any data-driven decision or system or technology, it's garbage in, garbage out, so quality does matter. And within entities, like I said, we think that a data management reference framework like the DAMA applied to the public sector is something that's worth exploring. It's a multi-dimensional maturity level. Now, there are others. Spain has its own maturity level and its own data management reference framework. We just mentioned DAMA because it's the one that we're familiar with, and then have those action plans to close the gaps on that maturity model. And to close, again, nothing to do, but I just want to say it. The value of data is realized only through better decisions and by using the data. Digital public infrastructure are systems that enable service provision at large scale. New data-enabled technologies, including AI, are garbage in, garbage out, so quantity and quality of data matter. And to improve both, a data governance mechanism must be defined, and we believe that data management practices need to be adopted. Okay, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was so interesting. I loved absolutely the visuals from the trains to the different slides. And then from the beginning, I've never seen that data value pyramid. So that was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Appreciate you being here. Now I'll quickly pass it over to our third speaker, Julia. She's a coordinator for the Telecommunications and Digital Rights Program at the Brazilian Institute for Consumer Protection, also known as IDEC. Julia works on issues related to technological regulation, data protection, and consumer advocacy. She also holds a master's degree in urban management from Pontifical Catholic University, with research focused on facial recognition and fundamental rights, as well as a specialization in criminal law and criminology. So today, Julia will bring an important rights-based consumer protection lens to our discussion. Welcome, Julia. Sorry, my apologies.
It's Julia in Portuguese. It's a little bit more difficult for it. It's Julia, but it's okay. You can say Julia. So I send you the presentation. If you can open for me, please, Annabelle.
Yes,
Maybe
I am on it.
Okay. Just to start, as we have a short time, and I would like to say first, thank you for the invitation. It's really important for us to be part of this conversation. It's a pleasure for the DEC. We are an independent organization, and in the past years, we've been building a strong connection with digital rights and consumer protection. And I will start, and then you can put okay. Okay. Yeah, the next one already, please. Okay. So, and first, I would like to explain a little bit about why we are talking about DPI. I think it's really important to acknowledge, and I will continue the conversation that Juan started, and Orlando continues, that when we are talking about digital identification, payment systems, and access to public services as data exchanges, we are talking about infrastructures that will shape how individuals will participate in digital society, not only as citizens, but also as consumers. In Brazil, Brazil is a particular interesting case because while we can already offer important lessons about innovation and scale, it's also a country marked by deep inequalities, vulnerabilities, data protection challenges, and technology dependencies. And all this can also make us offer important lessons about governance, risk management, inclusion, and important of the mitigate for consumer protections. And the third point that for us, it was important to document this trajectory, not simply to celebrate the success of PIX, but also to quickly understand what work, what's the challenges, and how we should, and how PIX and GovBR should be improved. And the next one, please. I know that, as Juan said, we spent with the support of Co-Develop the last 2 years understanding PIX and GovBR, but as we can have only a short time, I will talk about PIX more because I think it's more, the progress is a little bit more further, so it's better for us to do is an example here. And first, it's important to explain that when we start to study DPI, we saw it as a concept to navigate, but quickly we realized that to be able to contribute meaningfully in the conversation, we need to be part of, as we call, Forum PIX. This is space of governance and decision making in Brazil. As both of that speak before me said, it's really important to understand interoperability, not only about systems, but also about the people that is involved. So to be part of Forum PIX was really important for us. And as Juan already said, we are the only one now civil society organization in the Forum PIX, so it's a lot of work for us. But at least we have this opportunity, and we want to open more space because we understand that this is an important space, not only for us to build something really important in Brazil with PIX, but to exchange this knowledge with other countries. This is extremely important because as IDEC is part of the discussion, we are also part of the development of PIX. And as last year we launched the report of PIX and GovBR, we already made really important progress because some of our recommendations have already begun to be incorporated into discussions in the implementation of PIX in Brazil. The next one, please. Thank you. So, and what about PIX? I think most of the people in this conversation already know about PIX. PIX is this payment system that was created by the central bank, and they have 4 important objects. We want to reduce the use of cash, foster the competition, reduce costs. Okay, thank you. And expand financial inclusion. And I think we did a pretty good job because as we know, most of the Brazil population already use PIX. We are talking about 80%. And this 20% also includes child and adolescents and elderly people. So almost every adult, man, woman, and non-binary person is using PIX today. So it's a very important number. And also it became the most important method of payment in Brazil. So we did what we want to do, but there is challenges. And I will talk a little bit about that. Mercedes, the next one, please. Thank you very much. So to understand the challenges and put PIX in this conversation about interoperability, I will explain that when we are talking about interoperability, there is 4 things that I think it's really important. And I think my both friends already speak very good about it, but I want to emphasize that we need to talk about accessibility, competition, security, and progress. And that's why a place like Forum PIX, a governance place to make decisions, is so important. Of course, we need to understand that the PIX success in Brazil is not only because of the technology and includes the governance decisions, but when we are doing this, we are building an institutional structure capable of adapting, responding to risks, and incorporating different perspectives, not only the private sector, but the civil society organization. And these different perspectives is included while the infrastructure evolves. And this is it's a big challenge for us. Because as you know, we have different points of views. We have big banks and fintechs that are included in Forum PIX. But what we want here is something really important, is to bring together these people to be able to make rules that can be applied to each one of these actors. Because again, when we are talking about interoperability, even though, and it's an important point that the central bank is in the center of the decision making, all these actors are included in a group of, how can I say, not only participation, but contribution of this process. The next one. So, and when we can see interoperability and other examples in PIX, not only in the governance, but in their progress as a product. So the operation of PIX is amazing because it works 24 hours a day. I wish my day have 27 hours. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 5 days a year, and in less than 10 seconds for individuals is free charge, and perhaps most importantly is continue to continue the evolution of this. And as we see, I think it was really interesting the image that we saw, that to be able to have interoperability, we need to have this way, this free way to walk. I think Pix is working on this because the system is operating well, and the people that is the principal actors are participating. But we have another challenges. And again, interoperability, it's helping because, for example, when we are talking about fraud, we have this really good operation that is in English would be special return mechanism, MET, that make possible for the central bank to trace, block, and sometimes recover the funds that moves through different banking accounts in a really fast time, because all the systems are together and all the systems operate on the same rules. Another good example is the standard QR code model, because Pix uses a common standards, the same QR codes can be read across all the institutions, regardless of whether the payment is made to a major commercial or a small fintech. And this is also when we can see that interoperability is so important when we are talking about payment methods. And with all these lessons, I think the most important thing that I want to bring here, and my colleagues already told this, is when we are talking about interoperability, it's really important to talk about systems. But to build these systems, we need the actors working together. And I think Pix, the forum Pix, is a really good example that we can see what's already happened, but what is happening, because we are trying to build a community to be able to make Pix the most important, to continue to be the most important method of payment, but most important to be safe and to be global. So to be national, so everybody can use this. It's secure, and everybody trusts on this method. Thank you very much. And the next one is thank you. Thank you. I hope everybody can understand me. English is not my first language, but I really tried. Okay, thank you very much.
You did absolutely so great. I was able to understand everything. Being up here in Canada, I was unaware of PICS, so this is a really great presentation to learn all about it. So thank you so, so much. We only have about 10 minutes left, but I would love to open it to the floor for anyone that has questions on any of the three presentations or anything that you heard today. So I'll leave it there and see if there's any questions. Questions can be in English or in Spanish. I don't see anything. Feel free to also include them. Oh, there's one, Carlos.
Sí, se escucha.
Can you hear me?
Gracias, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mi pregunta es para... Uy, disculpen. Si quieren,
I'm
paso
sorry.
a otro porque me están llamando. Ay.
I'm getting cold right now, so can I please switch with another one?
Bueno, creo que terminó. Mi pregunta muy concreta.
No one calling now. Question to
Mi
Arturo.
nombre es Carlos
Let me
Carrasco,
introduce
soy,
myself. I'm Carlos Carrasco.
periodista,
I am a journalist and I'm pursuing a PhD at the University of the Basque Country. I am from Venezuela. I work on digital transformation and bridging the digital gap. Arturo, I truly enjoyed your presentation because among so many things being discussed right now in Venezuela, digital public infrastructure is part of the whole formula for restructuring our country, right? And along those lines, I wanted to know your opinion
países con las características que puede tener Venezuela en este momento.
on how a country with the characteristics of Venezuela right now,
¿Por dónde comenzar? Porque
where do we start? Because sometimes it would appear as if it were an octopus with so many arms, and it requires coordination and governance on top of digital knowledge. So I was thinking, how can we translate that into for a country with such obvious shortcomings as Venezuela? But I believe that there are many countries in Latin America facing similar challenges. Thank you.
I don't know, Annabelle, should I go for it? Yes? Okay. Yes.
Yes, go for it. Yes.
Okay, so muchas gracias, Carlos. Tienes razón.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And you are dead right. I believe that there are many challenges and there's not much information on the current situation in Venezuela. So hardly am I in a position to provide recommendations on a situation that is so unknown. What I can say is that one of the blessings in disguise, we could say, something good coming out of it, is that there's not much legacy. When there's too much legacy, these gaps with interoperability and everything can prove a little bit more complex. And several countries that have taken quantum leaps when it comes to DPI, among other things, in addition to political leadership and other things. Legacy can actually become an obstacle, a hurdle that can actually slow down the process. So where to start? Well, I believe that digital public infrastructure with this logic of enablers, or digital public infrastructure, the entity that is called identification, see if there's any digital identification. I don't know if there's an interoperability platform or a payment platform. I believe that this is something that we should try to do in parallel, because once again, as I said earlier, when it comes to GPI, value lies in the use. If I have a quantum GPI with 4 factors in numberless locks, it's useless. The value lies with use. That is why I believe that DPI needs interoperability in order to be able to provide services. And of course, for the public sector, we need this possibility of making agile payments. There are certain countries where we have identity and interoperability, but any bill, the customer needs to go to the bank and get a payment slip, and that defeats the whole purpose of it. So I would like to emphasize once again that I don't have much information about it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your question as well as your answer. I'll now pass it over to our next question from Paul.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the speakers if what their thoughts were around what do they think countries need to make progress? Do they, like, is it funding? Is it a central driving unit? Is it a stronger mandate from government across the agencies? What do they think would be most valuable to get progress in improving interoperability?
So I'll hand it over to all of our speakers. So whoever wants to take this.
I would like Paul to repeat, please, if he could, please.
Okay, I was wondering what the speakers thought was the most needed thing to happen in each country to drive increased interoperability. Was it like a central unit supporting agencies? Was it a stronger mandate from government down, that sort of thing?
I can start talking about Brazil. I think here we need to open more space for civil society and other actors to be part of Forum PIX, for example, talking about PIX, and to make places for GovBR or another DPI in CAR that is for rural register here in Brazil, another DPI that we have. So we have three most important to also have this governance spaces that I think it's what is the where the progress is more possible because we are listening to the needs and we are taking care of what needs to be taken care of. So I think the first thing is, and the second one is for us to be able to create spaces in Latin America because we already have other countries that can show us what we can do better and we can exchange these experiences. And I think it's, of course, we have EDLEC as one bring to us, but I think we need to increase more the debate spaces for this, and maybe we can exchange more things because I think we are doing this separately and it's becoming more difficult to have solutions.
Maybe I can pitch in with a regional perspective a little bit. I think there's not one answer to the question in the sense that it varies a lot depending on the maturity level from each different country. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we see that a lot because we have like all sorts of places in the spectrum of maturity. Brazil is way ahead of everybody, and then you have a long tail of anything all the way to no DPI at all or very, very little digitization of public services in general. And that implies that what you need in each of these instances is different. Some countries might benefit more from specific funding opportunities currently. Some countries lack capacity in government. I think that might be somewhat of a common factor, capacity within government. Some countries need to deploy new tech. Some countries need to modernize what's already in place. So it changes a lot, but I would say maybe one common factor for many countries, at least in the Latin American and Caribbean region, would be capacity for public servants to understand better what DPI actually means, what the new approach to digitization that DPI is proposing. And with that new understanding, it becomes much easier to actually enact interoperability and digital public infrastructure. And I think that's like a ground which is lacking in many countries that would make for easier adoption. Over.
Very short. I know we are on time, Annabelle, but I would add Paul. By the way, nice to see you. I would add people. You know what you mentioned about leadership, what you mentioned about, I was in Europe 2 weeks ago on an event that covered DPIs and covered digital identification, etc. And what I found is that this is not a problem that exclusive for developing countries. Many developed or northern hemisphere, or whatever, however you want to call them, countries do have the same challenges. And from what I was hearing from peers in those countries, legacy and egos and people are like the main challenge. Again, the technology is not a problem for these countries. In many cases, the money is not a problem, but it's just sitting down in a table, admitting that you may lose something to gain sort of a more collective, homogeneous, longer vision. And as obvious as it sounds, at least for me, I wouldn't call it eye-opening, but confirm that this is not, a problem from, our countries by far.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Arturo, and the rest of the speakers for answering Paul's question. We are at time, so I did want to just thank again our speakers for their amazing presentations. It was really, really wonderful. And I'd like to remind everyone that our next presentation, our next meeting will be on June 23rd. So I hope that you all can join because I fully believe that it's going to be just as interesting as the ones today. So thank you all again today for this meeting, and yeah, have a great day. Bye.
Thank you very much. It was nice to meet you all. If you need anything,
Yeah.
please contact us, okay? Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.